The quietest person in the room is always the one with the biggest secret. William Hayes learned this the hard way. Out in 1885 Montana, on a ranch so big the horizon felt like it belonged to him, William thought he had everyone figured out. He was a man made of leather and suspicion, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties because he trusted his gut and his gut trusted no one. But then came Ellie. And William decided to play a little game, a test of loyalty. He'd pretend to be asleep, vulnerable, and just watch. What he saw that night didn't just change his mind. It shattered everything he thought he knew about people, about secrets, and about the raw, untamed power of the truth. This is a story about a man who built walls around his heart and the quiet woman who tunneled right through them without making a sound. The Montana wind was a lonely sound, whispering through sagebrush and carrying the smell of dust across the Hayes Ranch. The sun bled out across the sky, painting everything in fire and blood as it sank behind the mountains. It was a hard land for hard men, and William Hayes was the hardest of them all. He sat in his big leather chair by the fireplace, the stone cool against his back, a glass of whiskey warming his hand. At 32, he'd already lived a lifetime of betrayal. He'd built his empire on shrewd deals and an almost supernatural ability to see the rot in a man's soul. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room, the house, the land beyond, and saw threats everywhere. He trusted nothing, and no one. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Hayes, dinner is ready, sir." He turned. It was her, Eleanor Murphy. Ellie, the ranch hands called her. She'd been his housekeeper for 3 months, and in all that time, he'd barely heard her speak above a whisper. She was a ghost in a gray dress, her auburn hair always pinned up tight, her green eyes always fixed on the floor. She was efficient, silent, invisible, and that made her the most dangerous person on his ranch. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, his voice a low rumble. He watched her flinch, just a little, at her own name. She nodded once, a quick, jerky motion, and vanished back into the shadows of the hallway. Her footsteps were so light you could barely hear them on the wood floors. William frowned, the whiskey swirling in his glass like a storm. People who tried that hard to go unnoticed? They weren't just shy. They were hiding. Dinner was served in the big dining room, lit by the flickering glow of oil lamps. She'd set his table with the good china like she always did. He never asked her to, but every night there it was. Roasted beef, potatoes from the garden, fresh bread still steaming. It was simple food, but cooked with a skill that felt out of place. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Hayes?" she asked from the doorway, her hands twisted together in front of her. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She was perched there like a frightened bird, ready to fly at the slightest sound. An idea, cold and sharp, formed in his mind. A test. "Sit with me," he said. The words hung in the air between them. Her eyes shot up to meet his, wide with a terror that seemed almost comical. "Oh, I couldn't, sir! It wouldn't be proper. I'm not asking what's proper," he said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "I'm telling you to sit." She hesitated, her whole body trembling, before she slowly moved to the chair across from him. She sat on the very edge, her back ramrod straight, looking like she'd rather be facing a firing squad. The only sound was the solemn ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock, counting down to something. "You've been here 3 months," William began, cutting into his beef, "and I know nothing about you, except that you work harder than any man I've got." "I prefer to keep to myself, sir," she whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean forward to hear it. "Where are you from, Ellie?" "Back east, sir." A pause. "My circumstances changed. I needed a fresh start." He watched her hands. They were calloused from work, yes, but they were small, delicate. The way she held herself, even in her fear, had a certain grace, an education. This wasn't some farmer's daughter. This was something else entirely. "What circumstances?" he pressed. He saw the color drain from her face, leaving her pale as a ghost in the lamplight. "If you don't mind, Mr. Hayes, I'd rather not discuss my past." Her voice was shaking now. "I promise you, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just need honest work." There it was again. The careful words, the proper grammar. He'd dealt with cowboys and drifters his whole life. They didn't talk like that. She spoke like she belonged in a drawing room, not a dusty ranch house in the middle of nowhere. "Everyone has a past, Ellie," he said, softening his tone just a fraction. "I respect a person's right to leave it behind, as long as they're honest in the present." A flicker of relief crossed her face. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." After dinner, he went to his study. The door was ajar and he could hear her in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes. And then, something else. She was humming. It wasn't a folk song or a saloon tune. It was classical, complicated, a melody that spoke of tutors and concert halls. Every little thing about her was a contradiction, a puzzle, a lie. William Hayes had built his fortune by never ever taking people at face value, and he wasn't about to start now. Tomorrow night, he decided. Tomorrow night, he would lay the trap. He would play the part of a man lost to drink, passed out in his chair. He would become the bait. And he would see what kind of animal Miss Eleanor Murphy really was when she thought no one was watching. He had no idea that the truth was far more terrifying than any lie he could have imagined, and that his simple test would unleash a storm that would threaten to burn his entire world to the ground. The next evening, an autumn chill crept into the house, a harbinger of the brutal winter to come. William spent the afternoon in plain sight, drinking more than he usually would during a meeting with cattle buyers. He made sure the ranch hands saw him. He made sure she saw him. The stage was being set. At 9 o'clock, the grandfather clock chimed, its solemn bells echoing through the silent house. William made his way to the study, stumbling just enough, his steps heavy and unsteady. He knew she was in the kitchen, finishing her chores. He knew she could hear him. "Ellie," he called out, slurring his words carefully. "That's enough for tonight. Go on, get some rest." "Yes, sir," her soft voice came back. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." He sank into his big leather armchair, a stack of cattle reports in his lap. He let his head loll to the side, let the papers slip from his fingers and scatter across the floor. He slowed his breathing, deep and even, and closed his eyes to tiny slits. From this angle he could see the doorway, but to anyone entering the room, he would look like a man dead to the world. He waited. For nearly an hour, the only sounds were the creaks and groans of the old house settling, and the lonely howl of a coyote far out on the prairie. He was starting to think she wasn't going to take the bait, that his test was a failure. Then he heard it, a whisper of movement, the sound of bare feet on the polished hardwood floor. She appeared in the doorway, a single oil lamp in her hand. The light cast a golden halo around her, making her seem like an angel in the darkness. She was wearing a simple white cotton nightgown, and her auburn hair was undone, cascading over her shoulders. In that moment, she wasn't the mousy housekeeper. She was transformed. She was beautiful. She stood there for a long time, just watching him. William held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. Now she would make her move. He expected her to go for his desk, where he kept the cash box. Or maybe the safe behind the painting. Something that would finally reveal her true colors. But she didn't. Instead, she drifted silently into the room and knelt beside his chair. Her movements were slow, graceful. She began to pick up the papers he had dropped, her small hands gathering them one by one. She stacked them neatly on the side table, her touch so gentle it was like she was handling something sacred. William was stunned. This wasn't the behavior of a thief. And then, she did something that made the air freeze in his lungs. She began to sing. Her voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the silent room. But it was perfect. It was a professionally trained voice, singing a German lieder he vaguely remembered from his college days back east. Her pronunciation was flawless. Her tone was heartbreakingly pure. As she sang, she moved around the room, not cleaning, but tending. She straightened a book on a shelf. She ran a finger over the dusty mantelpiece. She adjusted the blanket he kept on the back of the sofa. It wasn't the work of a servant. It was the tender, loving care of a wife. When the song ended, she drifted back to his chair. She stood over him, her hand hovering just above his forehead. He could feel the warmth of her skin. He could see, even through his slitted eyes, the glisten of tears on her cheeks in the lamplight. "I wish," she whispered. her voice so quiet it was more a breath than a sound. I wish I could tell you the truth. Her voice caught, thick with a pain so raw it made his own chest ache. You've been kinder to me than anyone. You don't know what it means to feel safe, to be treated like a person. She pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. I know you're suspicious of me. I see it in your eyes. And you have every right to be. A woman like me, appearing from nowhere. William's mind was racing. The song, the accent, the grace. Who was this woman? I was Eleanor Blackwood, she breathed, and the name hit William like a punch to the gut. Blackwood. Judge Blackwood of Philadelphia. He'd read about it in the papers months ago. A massive scandal. The judge's high society daughter vanished right before her wedding to a senator's son. The papers had painted her as a flighty, ungrateful debutante. I had everything, she whispered to his sleeping form. Wealth, a good name, a future all mapped out for me in fancy drawing rooms. Her hand reached out again, and this time, she let her fingers brush against his hair. The touch was as light as a feather, but it sent a jolt through his entire body. But I couldn't marry him, she said, her voice breaking. Not after what he did, what he tried to do, and when I told my father, no one believed me. They called me hysterical, a liar. She took a ragged breath. So I ran. I took nothing. I became Eleanor Murphy, and for 3 months, working here, in this dusty house, I felt more like myself than I ever did in Philadelphia. She looked down at him, and the tenderness in her eyes was so real, so profound, it stole his breath away. You make me feel safe, William Hayes, and tomorrow I'll go back to being your quiet little housekeeper who never looks you in the eye. But tonight, I just wanted to thank you. She leaned down. He felt the soft, warm press of her lips against his forehead, a kiss so gentle he might have imagined it. Sleep well, she whispered, and then she was gone. The room was dark again, but it felt different, charged. William was alone, but the space was filled with the weight of her secret, the ghost of her song, and the lingering scent of lavender soap. He hadn't just discovered she wasn't a thief. He had discovered she was a prisoner, and her cage was a lie he now held the key to. William didn't move for a long, long time. He just sat there in the darkness, the echo of her confession playing over and over in his mind. Eleanor Blackwood, the spoiled society girl from the newspapers. But the woman who had just kissed his forehead wasn't spoiled. She was broken. She was terrified, and she was hiding in plain sight. He thought about the man she'd fled, Thomas Morrison, son of a senator, a man with power, with connections, a man who could crush a person without even trying, a man who had hurt her. A cold, unfamiliar rage began to burn in William's chest. All his life, he had built walls to keep people out, to protect himself. But in that moment, all he wanted to do was build a wall around her. He sat in that chair until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. He watched the sun rise over his land, but he wasn't thinking about his cattle or his fortune. He was thinking about a pair of sad green eyes and a whispered confession in the dark. He had set a trap for a thief, but he had caught an angel. He found her in the kitchen, already back in her drab gray dress, her hair pinned up, her face a pale, blank mask. She was the ghost again, but now he could see the cracks in her disguise. He saw the slight tremor in her hands as she prepared his coffee, the dark circles under her eyes. "Good morning, Ellie," he said. His voice was softer than he intended. "Good morning, sir," she mumbled, her eyes fixed on the coffee pot. "Breakfast will be a few minutes late. I overslept." "It's fine." He walked closer. "I need to speak with you." The coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the stone floor. She cried out, a small, wounded sound, and immediately dropped to her knees, frantically trying to pick up the broken pieces. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. I'll replace it, I promise. I don't know what's wrong with me this morning." He knelt beside her, his big hands gently covering hers, stilling their frantic movement. "Ellie, stop!" She froze. "Look at me." Slowly her head came up. Her green eyes, filled with fear and shame, met his, and in that moment he knew he couldn't let her run again. "I know," he said, his voice a low whisper. The color drained from her face. It was as if he had struck her. She tried to pull her hands away, but he held them firm. "Eleanor Blackwood," he said. A single tear spilled from her eye and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Then another, and another. A choked sob escaped her lips. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. "Please don't send me back. I'll leave. I'll go right now, but please, don't tell them where I am." The sheer terror in her voice was like a knife in his gut. This wasn't a game. This was life and death. "I'm not sending you anywhere," he said, his voice hard with conviction. "But you have to tell me everything. The truth." She stared at him, her eyes searching his, trying to see if this was another trap. Then, like a dam breaking, the story poured out of her. She told him about Thomas Morrison, about his charm in public and his cruelty in private, about the bruises he left on her arms, hidden beneath the sleeves of her expensive dresses. "He said it was because he loved me so much," she whispered, her voice filled with a bitter irony, "that he couldn't bear for me to disappoint him." William's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. She told him about the night before their engagement party. How Morrison had cornered her in her father's library. How he had torn her dress. How she had screamed and fought back. And how he had slapped her, so hard her lips split and her eyes swelled shut. "I ran to my father," she said, the memory making her tremble. "But Thomas had gotten to him first. He told him I was drunk, hysterical, that I had thrown myself at him." Her voice turned to ice. "My own father! He believed him. He said I was trying to ruin a good man, and that the wedding would be moved up, to stop any more incidents." "So you ran," William finished for her. "I ran," she confirmed, "and I've been running ever since." They were silent for a long moment, the broken pieces of the coffee cup scattered around them like the shattered fragments of her old life. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "Because I was afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Afraid you'd believe the stories just like everyone else. That you'd send me back." William stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. He looked down at this small, brave woman who had given up everything to survive. "Eleanor," he said, using her real name. "It felt right. Look at me." She lifted her tear-stained face. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met," he said, and he meant it more than anything he had ever said in his life. "And you're safe here. I give you my word. No one will ever hurt you again." But even as he said it, a cold dread washed over him, because men like Thomas Morrison didn't just give up. They didn't just let their property walk away. And William knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this wasn't over. The real storm hadn't even begun. It was just 3 days later that the telegram arrived. It was delivered by a boy from town, his horse lathered in sweat from the hard ride. William was in the barn, checking on a pregnant mare, when the boy found him. "Mr. Hayes!" he panted, holding out the yellow envelope. "Marked urgent, sir. The operator said to get it to you right away." William's gut tightened. Urgent was never good news. He ripped it open. The words were stark, emotionless, printed in cold, black ink. "Thomas Morrison and Associates arriving November 1st. Stop. Searching for missing person. Eleanor Blackwood. Stop. Reward offered. Stop. Advise if seen. Stop." It was signed by a Pinkerton detective agency from Chicago. William's blood ran cold. He looked at the date. November 1st. That was tomorrow. He found Eleanor in the garden, humming that same classical tune as she tended to the last of the autumn vegetables. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. She looked happy, and he was about to destroy it. He walked towards her, the telegram feeling like a lead weight in his hand. Her smile faded the moment she saw the look on his face. "What is it, William? What's wrong?" He couldn't speak. He just handed her the piece of paper. He watched her read it. He watched the color drain from her face, the light go out in her eyes. The telegram fluttered from her numb fingers and landed in the dirt. "They found me," she whispered. It was the sound of a soul breaking. "He found me." She started to back away, her eyes wide with panic. "I have to go. I have to leave now. Tonight. Before they get here." "No," William said, his voice a low growl. "You're not running anymore. You don't understand," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "He's a monster. He'll destroy you for helping me. Your ranch, your name, everything. He won't stop until he's ruined you. He grabbed her hands, holding her still. Then we fight him. Together. Together? She echoed, her voice trembling. He took a deep breath. He knew what he was about to say was insane. It was reckless. It was the most dangerous gamble of his life. But he also knew it was the only way. Marry me, he said. She just stared at him, her mouth open, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? Marry me, he repeated, his voice stronger now, more certain. Right now. Today. As my wife, you'll have legal protection. This is Montana, Eleanor. Out here, a husband's rights are absolute. Morrison can't just drag you away if you're Mrs. William Hayes. You're crazy, she whispered. You barely know me. This isn't a business deal, William. This is marriage. I know what it is, he said, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. And it's not just about protecting you. It's because in 3 months, you've become more important to me than this land, than my name, than anything. It's because the thought of you running again, of never seeing you again, it's a thought I can't live with. It's because I think I'm falling in love with you. The world seemed to stop spinning. The wind died down. The only sound was the frantic beating of his own heart. He saw the shock in her eyes, followed by a flicker of something else, something fragile and hopeful. But the scandal, she protested weakly. When everyone finds out who I am? Let them talk, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've never given a damn what people think. The only thing that matters is what you think. Do you trust me, Eleanor? Can you see a life here, with me? She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw the war raging inside her. The fear against the hope, the past against the future. And then, she whispered the words that would seal both of their fates. I think I'm falling in love with you too. He didn't waste a second. Then let's go. Go where? To town. To the preacher. Morrison gets here tomorrow. We're going to give him a wedding reception he'll never forget. They rode into town like they were riding into battle. The preacher was a stern, weather-beaten man who looked them over with suspicious eyes, but William's money and his reputation smoothed the way. They stood in the small, dusty church, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Eleanor wore her simple gray dress, but she held a bouquet of wildflowers William had picked for her from the side of the road. When the preacher asked him if he took this woman to be his wife, William's voice boomed through the empty church. I do. When he asked Eleanor, she looked at William, her green eyes shining with tears, but this time they were not tears of fear. I do, she said, her voice clear and strong. They walked out of that church as husband and wife. But they both knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the war. The next day, just as the sun was beginning to set, a fancy carriage pulled up to the ranch house, kicking up a cloud of dust. 2 men got out. One was a tall, grim-faced man in a city suit, the detective. The other was handsome, elegantly dressed, with a charming smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. Thomas Morrison had arrived. Eleanor was in the garden. When she saw the carriage, she froze. William came out of the house and stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. A silent signal. I'm here. We do this together. Morrison strode towards them, his smile widening. Eleanor, my dear, you've led us quite a chase, but the game is over. It's time to come home. Eleanor lifted her chin. She looked at the man who had haunted her nightmares for months, the man she had run 1,000 miles to escape, and she felt no fear. My name, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed, is Mrs. Hayes, Eleanor Hayes, and you are trespassing on my husband's property. She held up her left hand. The simple gold band on her finger glinted in the setting sun, a tiny shield against the darkness. Morrison's smile vanished. His face twisted into a mask of pure fury. The battle had been joined, and in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Montana, there were no rules. Morrison's face was a storm cloud of rage. Hayes, he sneered, looking William up and down with open contempt. You think this rustic brute can protect you from me? From your own father? You belong to me, Eleanor. She belongs to no one, William said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of his new wife. She is my wife. Under the laws of this territory, that makes this my business. Now I suggest you and your man get back in your carriage and get off my land. The detective, A man with wary eyes who had seen his share of frontier justice put a hand on Morrison's arm. Sir, perhaps we should be more diplomatic. The legal standing has changed. Morrison shook him off. I don't care about the law. I care about what's mine. He pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor. You will come with me now, or I will burn this entire pathetic ranch to the ground with him in it. But before William could respond, something else happened. A flicker of movement from the direction of the bunkhouse. One of William's own ranch hands, a young man named Jake, was walking towards them. He was holding his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on the ground. Mr. Morrison, Jake said, his voice trembling, that reward you mentioned, is it still being offered? A cold dread washed over William. Betrayal. It always came from the inside. A triumphant, ugly smile spread across Morrison's face. It is indeed, my boy. A handsome sum for anyone who can help me recover my property. Jake finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of greed and fear. He glanced at Eleanor, then quickly away. She told me things, sir, about how she ran away. Said she was afraid of you. She ain't his wife. Not really. It was a sham, just yesterday. I heard them talking about it. The world tilted under Eleanor's feet. One of their own, for a handful of silver. Morrison laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You see, Hayes? Your loyalty is for sale, just like everything else in this miserable wasteland. Now, Eleanor, for the last time, he's lying, William said, his voice dangerously calm. He didn't even look at Jake. His eyes were locked on Morrison. He's lying, and you know it. But it doesn't matter. You have no power here. Oh, I think I do, Morrison said. He pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket. This is a warrant, signed by your own territorial judge. It gives me the authority to take my fiancée, who is clearly unwell and suffering from delusions, back into the care of her father. The detective looked uneasy. Sir, the marriage certificate complicates. The marriage is a fraud, Morrison roared. And this boy is my witness. Now step aside, Hayes. William stood his ground. He knew Morrison was right about one thing. A judge's warrant, even one bought and paid for, carried weight. He was trapped. He had gambled on the law, and the law had been corrupted. Just when all hope seemed lost, a new voice cut through the tense air. That warrant ain't worth the paper it's printed on. Everyone turned. Leaning against the corral fence was the sheriff of Powder County, a grizzled old man named Elias Thorne. He was chewing on a piece of straw, his hand resting casually on the Colt peacemaker strapped to his hip. Sheriff Thorne, William said, relief flooding through him. William, the sheriff nodded. He spat the straw onto the ground and ambled forward. Got a wire from a friend of mine back in Chicago. A U.S. Marshal. Said some fancy city folks were headed this way, looking to stir up trouble with a fraudulent warrant. Asked me to keep an eye out. He stopped in front of Morrison, his faded blue eyes as hard as pebbles. Judge Miller might be for sale, but the law in my county ain't. Now, this lady here says she's Mrs. Hayes. I got a copy of the marriage license right here in my pocket, filed this morning. As far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the story. Morrison stared at the sheriff, his face turning a blotchy red. Do you have any idea who I am? Yep, Thorne said. You're a man who's about 3 seconds from being arrested for trespassing, attempted kidnapping, and trying to bribe my constituents. I suggest you take your warrant and your hired gun and ride out, and don't come back. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across the yard. Morrison looked from the sheriff's cold eyes to William's stony face, and finally to Eleanor. He saw not a frightened girl, but a woman standing beside her husband, protected by a law he could not buy. He was beaten, and he knew it. With a snarl of pure hatred, Morrison turned and stalked back to his carriage. The detective, looking immensely relieved, gave a slight nod to the sheriff and followed him. Jake, the young ranch hand, stood frozen in place, the reality of his betrayal crashing down on him. William walked over to him, his face unreadable. Get your things, William said, his voice flat and cold. Be off my land by sunup. Jake opened his mouth to protest, to beg, but one look at William's eyes silenced him. He turned and scurried back towards the bunkhouse. A pariah. Eleanor walked up to William, her body shaking with the aftermath of the confrontation. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest. It's over, he whispered into her hair. "He's gone." "Thank you," she sobbed, clinging to him. "You saved me." He held her for a long time as darkness settled over the prairie. He looked up at the endless expanse of stars, a ceiling of diamonds over their fortress. He had won the battle, but he had a sinking feeling that Morrison wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few weeks were quiet, deceptively so. William fired Jake, and the story of the confrontation with Morrison spread through the territory like wildfire. William and Eleanor Hayes became local legends. The rich rancher who married his housekeeper to save her from a villainous Easterner. It was the stuff of dime novels. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor was no longer the invisible housekeeper. She was the lady of the house, William's wife. She took to her new role with a quiet confidence that amazed him. She managed the household accounts with a shrewdness that rivaled his own, and she earned the respect of the ranch hands with her kindness and her grit. For the first time in his life, William's house felt like a home. He found himself rushing back from the fields just to see her smile. They would talk for hours by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams for the future. He discovered she had a wicked sense of humor and a brilliant mind. She discovered that beneath his hard exterior was a man of deep loyalty and surprising tenderness. They were falling deeper in love with every passing day, but a shadow still lingered at the edges of their happiness. William knew Morrison wouldn't let this go. Men like that saw women as possessions, and Eleanor's defiance was an insult to his pride that he would never forgive. William hired 2 extra men, veterans of the war, to patrol the ranch borders. He slept with a shotgun by his bed. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a cold morning in late November. William had ridden out to check on a northern pasture when he saw it. Smoke. A thick, black pillar of it, rising into the clear blue sky. It was coming from the direction of the hay barn. He spurred his horse into a frantic gallop, his heart pounding with a terror he had never known. Fire was a rancher's worst nightmare. A single spark could wipe out a year's worth of feed, leaving his herd to starve in the coming winter. But as he got closer, he realized it was worse than that. The smoke wasn't just coming from the hay barn, it was coming from the house. His house, where Eleanor was. He rode into the ranch yard like a man possessed. The hay barn was already an inferno, flames leaping 50 feet into the air. And the back of the main house, the kitchen wing where he knew Eleanor spent her mornings, was engulfed in fire. His men were running everywhere, shouting, forming a bucket brigade from the well, but it was a pathetic effort against the raging blaze. "Eleanor!" he screamed, leaping from his horse before it had even stopped. "Eleanor!" One of his men, a grizzled old cowboy named Hank, grabbed his arm. "She's still in there, boss! The fire started in the kitchen, trapped her in the pantry!" William's blood turned to ice. He looked at the wall of flames roaring from the kitchen windows, the thick, choking smoke pouring from the roof. It was a death trap. He didn't hesitate. He shrugged off Hank's hand and ran towards the front door, pulling his neckerchief up over his nose and mouth. "Boss, no, you'll never make it!" But William didn't listen. The only thought in his mind was her. He burst through the front door into a world of smoke and heat. The air was thick and black, stinging his eyes, scorching his lungs. He could hear the roar of the fire from the back of the house, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. He dropped to his hands and knees, crawling through the familiar layout of his home, now a hazy, suffocating nightmare. The heat was unbearable. He could feel his skin blistering. The sound of cracking timbers echoed all around him. The roof could go at any moment. "Eleanor!" he yelled, his voice a raw croak. He reached the doorway to the dining room. The fire was already eating through the wall from the kitchen. Through the smoke, he could see the pantry door at the far end of the room. It was closed. He scrambled across the floor, the heat from the burning walls searing his clothes. He reached the pantry door and fumbled with the handle. It was locked, or jammed. He threw his shoulder against it once, twice. It didn't budge. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. She was in there, just a few feet away, and he couldn't get to her. "William!" Her voice came from inside, faint and terrified. "I'm in here! I'm here, Eleanor! I'll get you out!" he screamed, his voice breaking. He slammed his body against the door again and again, a primal scream of rage and desperation tearing from his throat.
The wood splintered, but held. The roar of the fire grew louder. A section of the ceiling collapsed in the dining room behind him, showering him with sparks and burning embers. He was out of time. He was going to lose her. He had saved her from Morrison, only to lose her to this. The irony was so cruel it was laughable. Then, through the smoke-filled haze, he saw it.
Lying on the floor by the wall was a heavy iron poker from the dining room fireplace. With the last of his strength, he crawled to it, his hands shaking. He grabbed the poker, staggered to his feet, and swung it with all his might against the wooden panels of the door. The wood cracked. He swung again. A hole appeared. He swung again and again, smashing the door to pieces, his lungs burning, his vision swimming in black spots. Finally, the lock gave way, and the door burst inward. He fell into the pantry, gasping for the slightly less toxic air inside. Eleanor was huddled in the far corner, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. He grabbed her, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go! Now!" He half dragged, half carried her out of the pantry, back into the inferno of the dining room. The main exit was blocked by a wall of flames. They were trapped. "The study!" he yelled, pointing towards the side of the house. "The window!" They stumbled through the smoke, guided only by memory. The heat was a physical force, pushing them back. William shielded Eleanor with his own body as another piece of the ceiling crashed down just inches from where they stood. They reached the study. The room was filled with smoke, but the fire hadn't reached it yet. William lunged for the heavy curtains over the large window, tearing them down. He used the butt of the fireplace poker to shatter the thick glass. He helped Eleanor climb through the broken window, cutting her hands on the jagged edges. Not even noticing, he scrambled out after her, and they collapsed onto the grass outside, gulping in the clean, cold air, their bodies shaking, their faces black with soot. They watched in stunned silence as the roof of their home caved in with a deafening roar, sending a shower of sparks and embers into the sky. The house was gone, everything he had built. Gone. But he didn't care. He looked at Eleanor, alive and breathing beside him, and he knew he still had everything that mattered. He held her close as his men finally managed to get the fire under control, saving the barn and the bunkhouse. The main house was nothing but a smoking, blackened skeleton. As the sun began to set on the ruins of his home, Sheriff Thorne rode into the yard. He took one look at the devastation and his face hardened. "This wasn't an accident, was it, William?" William looked at the ruins, then at his wife, safe in his arms, and he thought of Thomas Morrison's parting threat. "I will burn this entire pathetic ranch to the ground." "No, Sheriff," William said, his voice quiet but filled with a cold, hard certainty. "This was a message." But then the sheriff's deputy pointed to something near the foundation of the kitchen, a small metal tin, blackened by the fire but not destroyed. The sheriff pried it open. Inside was a wad of oil-soaked rags. Arson, no doubt about it. But tucked inside the rags was something else. A small, tarnished silver locket. The sheriff handed it to Eleanor. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She gasped. William looked over her shoulder. Inside the locket were two tiny, faded portraits. One was of a woman he didn't recognize. The other was a man, a much younger Judge Marcus Blackwood. Her father. It wasn't Morrison. It was her own father who had tried to kill her. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Eleanor stared at the locket, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Her father. The man who had raised her, who was supposed to protect her. He had sent men not just to bring her back, but to silence her. Permanently. "It can't be," she whispered, shaking her head. He couldn't. But the evidence was right there in her hand. The locket was one she remembered from her childhood, one her mother had always worn. Her father must have given it to the arsonist as proof of payment, or as a way to identify his target. A cruel, personal message. William's rage was a cold, quiet thing. It settled deep in his bones. This was no longer just about protecting his wife. This was about justice. Or maybe something closer to vengeance. "He chose Morrison over you," William said, his voice tight. "He chose his reputation, his political connections. You escaping, marrying me. You didn't just defy him. You became a liability, a loose end." Sheriff Thorne looked grim. "This changes things. Thomas Morrison we can handle out here, a powerful federal judge. That's another story. He could have us all buried in legal troubles so deep we'd never see daylight. So we do nothing? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling with a new kind of fury. We let him get away with this? With trying to murder me? I didn't say that, the sheriff said, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. I said we can't fight him on his terms. We have to fight him on ours. That night, they huddled in the relative comfort of the bunkhouse, making a plan. They had no home, their supplies were destroyed, and they had a powerful enemy who wanted them dead. They were at their lowest point, but they were together, and they were fighting back. The key is the witness, William said, pacing the small room. The man who lied for Morrison, the one who saw you acting inappropriately. His name is Charles Croft, Eleanor said. He was one of Thomas's friends. A hanger-on, really. His family had lost their fortune. He depended on the Morrisons for everything. A man like that doesn't just disappear, William reasoned. Morrison or your father would have paid him to keep his mouth shut. Sent him somewhere far away where he couldn't cause trouble. Like the frontier? The sheriff mused. It's the perfect place to lose a man. It was a long shot. A needle in a continent-sized haystack. But it was the only shot they had. If they could find Charles Croft, if they could convince him to tell the truth, they could expose the entire conspiracy. Judge Blackwood, Senator Morrison, their spoiled, vicious sons. They could bring the whole corrupt house of cards crashing down. William sent telegrams to every sheriff, every marshal, every Pinkerton office west of the Mississippi. He described Charles Croft, his age, his appearance, his fancy Eastern accent. He offered a reward, using what little cash he had managed to salvage from the safe in the burned-out house. Weeks turned into a month. Winter settled in, blanketing the Montana prairie in a thick layer of snow. William and his men worked tirelessly to rebuild the ranch house, their hammers echoing in the cold, clear air. Eleanor worked alongside them, her soft hands becoming calloused, her spirit hardening from fragile glass into tempered steel. They received dozens of replies to the telegrams, reports of men who matched Croft's description in mining camps in Colorado, saloons in Deadwood, gambling dens in San Francisco. William tracked down every lead, but each one was a dead end. Hope began to fade. The house was nearly rebuilt, but the shadow of her father's treachery still loomed over them. They knew he wouldn't try something so brazen again, not right away. He would wait, let them think they were safe, and then he would strike. It was the night before Christmas Eve. A blizzard was raging outside, piling snow up against the walls of the newly built house. They were sitting by the fire in the new parlor, the room still smelling of fresh-cut pine. Eleanor was reading aloud from a book, her voice a soft, soothing melody against the howling of the wind. There was a knock at the door. William grabbed the shotgun from its place by the mantel. He exchanged a look with Eleanor. No one traveled in a storm like this unless it was an emergency, or something worse. He opened the door. A man stood on the porch, covered in snow, his face blue with cold. He was thin, dressed in rags, and he was shaking uncontrollably. Help me, the man chattered, his teeth clattering. Please, my horse, collapsed in the storm. I saw your light. William lowered the shotgun. He was just a drifter, caught in the storm. Get inside, man, before you freeze to death. They brought the man in, sat him by the fire, and Eleanor brought him a bowl of hot stew and a cup of coffee. As the man began to thaw out, as the color returned to his face, Eleanor suddenly gasped. She dropped the coffee pot, which thankfully landed on the rug without breaking. You, she whispered, her face pale. The man looked up at her, his eyes widening in recognition, and in pure, abject terror. William looked from his wife's horrified face to the stranger's panicked one. Eleanor, who is this? His name, she said, her voice shaking with a mix of shock and rage, is Charles Croft. Charles Croft looked like a cornered rat. He tried to stand, to run, but he was too weak, too frozen. He collapsed back into the chair, his eyes darting between William's shotgun and Eleanor's furious face. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Don't lie to me, Charles, Eleanor said, her voice like ice. You stood in my father's library and lied to his face. You helped Thomas Morrison destroy my life, and you condemned me. The fight went out of him. He slumped in the chair, a picture of pathetic misery. They made me do it, he whispered. The Morrisons, your father, they owned me.
My family was destitute. They promised they would take care of us if I just corroborated Thomas's story. So you lied, William said, his voice flat. For money. They paid me and told me to disappear, Croft confessed, his voice cracking. They gave me $1,000 and a train ticket west. Said if I ever showed my face in Philadelphia again, I'd end up at the bottom of the Schuylkill River.
He looked up, his eyes pleading. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I've been living in hell ever since. That money ran out a year ago. I've been drifting, starving. A long silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howling of the wind. Here he was, the key, the man who could give them the justice they craved, but he was a broken, spineless creature. Will you testify? Eleanor asked, her voice quiet but firm. Will you tell the world what they did? Croft looked terrified. They'll kill me! They tried to kill her! William growled, stepping forward. They burned my home to the ground. Right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and freezing to death in that storm. You owe her this. You owe her her life back. Croft looked at Eleanor, at the strength in her eyes, the steel in her spine. He saw the woman he had wronged, and for the first time, a flicker of shame, of courage, ignited in his hollow chest. Yes, he whispered. I'll do it. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. It was perfect. They couldn't bring Judge Blackwood out to Montana to face justice, so they would take the justice to him. William used his connections with the cattle barons in Chicago. He had them pull strings, whisper in the right ears. A special investigative committee was formed in Washington, ostensibly to look into corruption on the western frontier. But its real purpose was much more specific. They subpoenaed Judge Marcus Blackwood to testify. The hearing was held in a grand wood-paneled room in Washington, D.C. Judge Blackwood sat at the witness table, the picture of dignity and authority. He answered the committee's preliminary questions with confidence, a man completely in his element, a man who believed himself to be untouchable. Then, the committee chairman looked to the back of the room. The committee calls its next witness, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. A murmur went through the room as Eleanor walked to the front. She was no longer the mousy housekeeper in gray. She was dressed in a simple but elegant gown, her head held high. She looked every inch the society lady she had been born to be. Judge Blackwood's face went pale. He stared at his daughter as if he were seeing a ghost. Eleanor told her story. Calmly, clearly, she detailed Thomas Morrison's abuse, her father's betrayal, the fire, the locket. The room was silent, captivated. When she was finished, Judge Blackwood laughed, a condescending, dismissive sound. Gentlemen, he said to the committee, I love my daughter, but as you can hear, she is unwell. She has always been prone to fits of fancy, of hysteria. This is a tragic family matter, a fantasy spun by a troubled mind. Is it a fantasy, Judge? The chairman asked. Or is it the truth? He looked to the back of the room again. The committee calls Mr. Charles Croft. If Blackwood had seen a ghost before, he was now looking at the devil himself. Croft walked to the witness stand, his hands shaking, but his eyes determined. He looked directly at his old benefactor, and he told them everything. He told them about the lie, the cover-up, the payoff. He described the meeting where Judge Blackwood and Senator Morrison planned to send men to deal with the problem in Montana. He corroborated every detail of Eleanor's story. It was over. In a matter of minutes, Judge Marcus Blackwood's entire world had crumbled to dust around him. His reputation was shattered. His career was over. His carefully constructed life was a lie, exposed for all the world to see. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Judge Blackwood was impeached and removed from the bench, facing federal charges for conspiracy and attempted murder. Senator Morrison, implicated in the cover-up, resigned in disgrace. His son, Thomas, was charged with assault. The powerful families that had seemed so invincible were brought to their knees by the testimony of one brave woman and one cowardly man who finally found his courage. William and Eleanor returned to Montana, not as fugitives, but as heroes. They finished rebuilding their home, not as it was, but better, stronger. A fortress built not of wood and stone, but of love and resilience. They stood on the porch of their new house, looking out at the vast expanse of the prairie. the same wind that had once sounded so lonely now whispering a song of peace. Eleanor leaned her head on William's shoulder. It's finally over, she said. No, he said, pulling her close. It's just beginning. He was right. They had faced down villains and conspiracies. They had survived fire and betrayal. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and forged a love that was stronger than any lie. They had learned that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people hide from the world, but the ones they hide from themselves. And that the truth, no matter how painful, has a power all its own, a power to heal, a power to bring justice, and a power to set you free. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice on the American frontier, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of hidden truths and unexpected heroes.